My name is Elena Morrow. I'm 29 years old. And for as long as I can remember, my parents treated me like the extra child, the one you tolerate, not the one you invest in. My younger brother, Lucas, was the pride of the family. Straight A's. Business school in Paris. Family dinners where his future was discussed like a royal succession plan. Mine? Rarely mentioned. When relatives asked what I was doing with my life, my mother would smile tightly and say, "Oh, Elena is figuring things out." What she really meant was, Elena isn't worth explaining. I wasn't stupid. I wasn't lazy. I just didn't fit the version of success my parents worshipped. They paid for Lucas's internships, his apartment, his startup ideas. I worked 2 jobs to finish university and slept in a shared studio with peeling walls and a broken heater. And still, I told myself, one day they'll see me. That illusion shattered the afternoon my father called a family meeting. We sat in the living room of my parents' house, the same house my grandmother had paid for decades earlier. My father didn't waste time. "Elena," he said, not looking at me, "we've finalized the inheritance structure." I felt my chest tighten. Lucas straightened in his seat. "All family assets," my father continued, "including the house, investments, and company shares, will go to your brother." My mother nodded, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. "And me?" I asked quietly. My father finally looked at me, irritation flashing across his face. "You're independent. Lucas will carry the family legacy." Legacy. That word echoed in my head as they handed Lucas champagne. What they didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that my grandmother had quietly rewritten the rules years ago. She saw the dinners I wasn't invited into. She heard the jokes at my expense. And before she died, she made a decision that would tear my parents' carefully constructed world apart. "If you've ever been dismissed by the people who were supposed to protect you, I want you to stay with me." Because what happened next changed everything. After that meeting, my parents acted like the decision was final, sealed, unquestionable, eternal. Lucas started making plans out loud. Renovations. Renting rooms. Modernizing the house. The house. The same house where my grandmother, Madeline, spent her final years in a quiet upstairs bedroom. The same woman my parents had slowly pushed aside once she stopped agreeing with them. They said she was confused near the end. That her memory wasn't reliable. That she needed rest, not responsibility. I knew better. I was the one who visited her every Sunday. I brought groceries. I fixed her phone when she forgot passwords. I listened when she spoke, not just with patience, but with respect. A week after the inheritance announcement, I went back to that house to collect a few boxes my mother said I could take if I wanted. That was her phrasing. As if I were a guest asking permission. I climbed the stairs slowly, my footsteps echoing in the hallway. My grandmother's room was untouched. The curtains still half open. The old wooden desk still pushed against the window. I sat on the bed and let the silence settle. That's when I noticed the drawer. It wasn't locked. Just deliberately ignored. Inside were letters. Legal envelopes. And a small leather folder with my name written on it, carefully, in my grandmother's handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a notarized document dated 3 years before her death. A revised will. My name appeared first. Not Lucas's. Not my parents'. Mine. It stated that the house, the investments, and the controlling shares of the family company were to be held in trust under my authority. There was also a letter. "Elena," it began. I stayed silent too long. "I won't do that again." She wrote about the dinners where I was dismissed. The jokes she pretended not to hear. The fear that my parents would never treat me fairly. So I prepared a moment where truth would speak for itself. I closed the folder slowly. They were celebrating too early. And they had no idea that the stage my parents had chosen for their victory was about to become the place where everything unraveled. I didn't confront my parents right away. That was the hardest part, staying silent when I finally held the truth in my hands. Instead, I followed my grandmother's instructions to the letter. At the bottom of the folder was a business card. Maître Julien Roche, family law attorney. I called the number the next morning. He already knew my name. I was wondering when you'd find it, he said calmly. We met 2 days later in his office, glass walls, neutral colors, no emotions on display. He explained everything. My grandmother hadn't just rewritten her will. She had anticipated resistance. There were safeguards. Witness statements. Medical evaluations proving she was mentally competent. Video recordings stored with a third party. She knew they would try to discredit her, the lawyer said. So she removed every possible doubt. I asked the question that had been burning inside me. Why didn't she tell me? He paused. Because she didn't want you to carry the burden. She wanted the truth to arrive when it could protect you. Then he told me where it would happen. My father had scheduled a formal family gathering, not a celebration, but a legal confirmation dinner. Extended relatives. Business partners. Even a notary. A public stage. Exactly as my grandmother had planned. Do you want to stop it before then? The lawyer asked. I shook my head. No. Let it happen. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of being underestimated. At the dinner, my parents sat confidently at the head of the table. Lucas talked about the future as if it were guaranteed. And I listened quietly, hands folded, while the notary prepared his documents. Then Maître Roche stood up. I believe, he said, we should review all valid documents before proceeding. The room went silent. My father frowned. What documents? The lawyer looked directly at me. The ones that change everything. The notary froze mid-page. My father let out a short, irritated laugh. This is unnecessary, he said. We've already agreed. Maître Roche didn't raise his voice. He simply placed a folder on the table. Agreement only matters, he replied, when all legal documents are considered. Lucas leaned forward. What documents? My grandmother's will was finalized years ago. The lawyer nodded slowly. Yes. And then it was revised. The room shifted. My mother's smile disappeared instantly. That's impossible, she said. Madeleine wasn't well. Maître Roche didn't argue. He turned to the notary. I'd like to submit medical evaluations from 3 independent doctors, he said, sliding papers forward. All confirming full mental capacity at the time of revision. The notary adjusted his glasses. My father's face hardened. This is ridiculous, he snapped. Why are we hearing this now? The lawyer finally looked at my parents directly. Because, he said, the beneficiary requested it be revealed in a neutral setting with witnesses. Lucas turned toward me for the first time that evening. What is this? He asked. I met his eyes calmly. The truth. Maître Roche opened the folder and began to read. According to the revised will of Madeleine Moreau, all primary assets are to be placed in a trust. The sole trustee. He paused. Is Elena Moreau. The sound that followed wasn't shouting. It was silence. A thick, uncomfortable silence. My mother's hand trembled as she reached for her glass. My father stood up so abruptly his chair scraped loudly against the floor. This is fraud, he said. She was manipulated. Maître Roche turned one page. There is also a recorded statement, he said evenly, explaining her reasoning. The notary looked up. I will need to hear that, he said. So would everyone else. And in that moment, I understood something clearly. My grandmother hadn't just protected me. She had chosen this room, these people, and this timing so that the truth would be impossible to deny. The notary nodded once. Play the recording, he said. Maître Roche connected a small device to the speakers on the table. My parents sat frozen. The room filled with a familiar, steady voice. My name is Madeleine Moreau, my grandmother said. I am of sound mind, and I make this statement willingly. I felt my throat tighten. I have watched my family for many years, her voice continued. And I have watched one child be overlooked again and again. My mother lowered her eyes. I was told Elena would manage on her own, my grandmother said. So I allowed myself to believe that was kindness. There was a pause in the recording. It wasn't. The words landed softly, but they cut deeply. I saw the way decisions were made without her, Madeline continued. The way praise was given to one child, and silence to the other. Lucas shifted uncomfortably. I am not changing my will out of anger, my grandmother said. I am correcting an imbalance. My father clenched his jaw. Elena never asked me for anything, the voice said. That is precisely why I chose her. The recording ended. No one spoke. The notary cleared his throat. The document is valid, he said. And so is the trust. My father turned to me, his face flushed. You planned this, he accused. You waited. I stood slowly. No, I said calmly. She did. My mother's voice was barely audible. What do you want now? She asked. I looked around the table. I want what was already written, I said. And nothing more. For the first time, they understood something they had never considered before. I had never needed to fight them. I only needed the truth to be heard. The dinner ended early. No one suggested dessert. No one made eye contact. The notary gathered his documents and confirmed the next legal steps. Everything would be transferred officially within weeks. My parents left first. My father didn't say goodbye. My mother hesitated at the door, then followed him without looking back. Lucas stayed behind. He looked smaller somehow, stripped of certainty. I didn't know, he said quietly, about any of this. I believed him. That doesn't change what happened, I replied. But it explains it. He nodded once. Outside, the night air felt lighter than I expected. For the first time, I wasn't carrying their disappointment on my shoulders. In the weeks that followed, the changes were quiet but final. The trust was activated. The house became legally mine to manage. The company shares gave me decision-making power not to punish, but to protect. I didn't evict anyone. I didn't humiliate them publicly. I simply stopped asking for permission. My parents called once. Not to apologize, but to ask what would happen next. Nothing, I said. If you respect the boundaries. They didn't like that answer. But they accepted it. Sometimes, revenge isn't about taking something away. It's about reclaiming what was never meant to be withheld. My grandmother knew that. And now, so did I. A few months later, I stood alone in the upstairs bedroom, my grandmother's room. Nothing had changed. The same curtains. The same desk. The same quiet strength in the air. I finally allowed myself to grieve not just for her death, but for the years I spent believing I wasn't enough. I realized something important. My parents never truly saw me, not because I lacked value, but because seeing me would have forced them to admit their own failures. Power has a way of revealing truth. With control of the trust, I made one decision my grandmother would have approved of immediately. I converted part of the house into a small foundation, nothing public, nothing dramatic. It funded education for children who were quietly overlooked. The ones told they'd figure things out. I never put my name on it. I didn't need recognition anymore. One afternoon, I received a handwritten letter. It was from my mother. She didn't apologize. But she acknowledged something she had never said before. I didn't protect you the way I should have. That was all. I folded the letter and placed it in my grandmother's drawer. Some stories don't end with forgiveness. They end with clarity. And sometimes, that's enough. Life didn't suddenly become perfect after that. There were still awkward holidays. Still conversations that never quite reached the surface. Still moments when silence said more than words. But something fundamental had shifted. I no longer felt the need to explain myself. When people asked about my family, I spoke honestly, without bitterness, without defense. They did what they thought was right, I would say. And I chose to do the same. The house no longer felt like a battleground. It felt like a place that finally belonged to truth. Sometimes I would sit at my grandmother's desk and imagine her watching, not with pride, but with relief. Relief that the cycle had stopped. That one person had been protected. That fairness, even delayed, had arrived. I learned something I wish I'd known earlier. You don't need to raise your voice to be heard. You don't need to destroy others to reclaim yourself. And revenge. isn't always about punishment. Sometimes, it's simply about balance. If this story feels familiar, if you've ever been overlooked, dismissed, or quietly sidelined, remember this. Your worth doesn't disappear just because others refuse to see it. And one day, the truth has a way of speaking for itself. Years have passed since that night. The legal papers are long filed away. The tension has softened into distance. Not healed, just settled. People sometimes ask me if I regret not confronting my parents more harshly. If I regret not taking revenge the way stories usually show it. I don't. Because the most powerful thing I ever did was stop proving myself to people who had already decided who I was. The trust still exists. Quietly. Doing exactly what my grandmother intended. Supporting education. Creating opportunities. Giving stability to those who never asked for it because they were taught not to. I visit her grave once a year. I don't bring flowers. She never cared for them. I bring updates. I tell her the house is still standing. That no one was thrown out. That fairness didn't need cruelty to survive. And sometimes, I imagine her response. Not praise. Not approval. Just that familiar calm. As if to say, you're safe now. And that was always the point. There's something people don't talk about after stories like this. What happens after the applause fades? After justice is served? After the villain loses? Life doesn't suddenly become perfect. It becomes quiet. And quiet can be unsettling when you've spent your whole life fighting to be heard. For a long time, I woke up waiting for the next battle. The next accusation. The next phone call that would pull me back into chaos. It never came. Instead, there was space. Space to choose who I answer to. Space to decide what kind of person I wanted to be when no one was watching. I learned something unexpected. Power doesn't feel loud when you hold it the right way. It feels stable. Boring, even. And that's when I knew my grandmother was right. She didn't give me control to make noise. She gave it to make sure no one else ever had to beg for dignity again. That silence taught me something else too. I didn't miss my old life. I missed the version of myself who kept hoping they'd change. And letting go of that hope was harder than confronting them. Hope can keep you trapped longer than fear. Because fear tells you to run. Hope tells you to wait. For the first time, I stopped waiting. I stopped rehearsing conversations in my head. Stopped imagining apologies that would never come. Stopped shrinking to fit into rooms that never wanted me whole. And here's the part nobody warns you about. When you stop chasing validation, some people get angry. Not because you hurt them, but because you're no longer controllable. That's when I knew I was finally free. Freedom didn't arrive quietly. It arrived with whispers. Emails stopped coming. People who used to smile at me suddenly avoided eye contact. Doors that once felt heavy now closed completely. And I realized something uncomfortable. My value to them had always been conditional. As long as I stayed small, I was acceptable. As long as I needed them, I was manageable. The moment I stopped needing approval, I became a problem. That's when the narrative changed. I wasn't misunderstood anymore. I was ungrateful. Difficult. Unstable. It was easier for them to rewrite me than admit they were wrong. But this time, I didn't correct the story. I let them believe whatever they needed to. Because I finally understood. Not everyone deserves access to the real version of you. The turning point came quietly. Not in a meeting. Not in an argument. Not with raised voices or slammed doors. It came in a single email. Subject line, board confirmation. I stared at the screen, my heartbeat loud in my ears. The board had finalized it. My role wasn't symbolic. It wasn't temporary. And it definitely wasn't reversible. For the first time, my name carried authority. Not because of my last name, but because of what I'd proven. I hadn't begged. I hadn't threatened. I had simply shown the truth and stepped back. And somehow, that was enough. That's when it hit me. Power doesn't announce itself. It moves silently, then it changes everything. The news didn't stay private for long. It never does. By the next morning, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Messages from people who hadn't spoken to me in years. Congratulations mixed with confusion. Curiosity disguised as concern. And then, my family reacted. My father didn't call. He sent a lawyer. A formal letter questioning the board's decision. Demanding delays. Threatening reviews. It wasn't about me. It was about control slipping through his fingers. Miranda texted me late that night. "You didn't have to do this." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I typed back. "I didn't do this to you. I did this for myself." She never replied. And in that silence, I understood something painful but necessary. When people benefit from your silence, they call your voice betrayal. Weeks passed. The chaos faded, but the consequences stayed. Board meetings became routine. Decisions carried weight. People listened, really listened, when I spoke. Not because they liked me, but because they had to. At home, the silence was permanent. No family dinners. No check-in calls. No forced apologies dressed as concern. And strangely, I felt lighter. I had grieved the family I wished I had. Now I was finally living with the one I actually did. Late one evening, I caught my reflection in the glass office wall. Tired. Older. But steady. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to be chosen. I had chosen myself. And that changed everything. The final twist came months later. At a public gala. Black tie. Press everywhere. Cameras flashing like lightning. I almost didn't go. But then I saw the guest list. My father was the keynote speaker. When I arrived, the room shifted. Whispers followed me across the marble floor. Heads turned. Conversations paused. Then the host stepped onto the stage. "And tonight," she said, smiling, "we honor the newest board leader responsible for last quarter's record growth." She said my name. I didn't look at my father. I didn't need to. The silence told me everything. Revenge didn't come as anger. It came as recognition. And it tasted like peace. I left the gala early. Not because I felt small. But because I felt complete. Outside, the city lights blurred into the night. For years, I thought revenge meant watching them suffer. I was wrong. Revenge was freedom. It was no longer needing their apology. No longer craving their approval. My father never spoke to me again. And that was okay. Because his silence no longer controlled me. Some people lose you the moment they stop owning you. And that loss is their punishment, not yours. I didn't win by destroying them. I won by becoming untouchable.